In 1979, when the USA established diplomatic relations with China, the USA was getting friendlier to a number of different communist governments at the time. The USA was friendly to Yugoslavia. The USA was friendly to Romania, to Poland. And there was a lot of different communist governments around the world that were having market reforms. Eventually, you had perestroika in the Soviet Union, but there were a number of communist governments in the world that were having market reforms. And the idea that the USA had, that the imperialists had, was we'll do market reforms, and these countries will see how great capitalism is, and we'll give them investment, and they'll distance themselves from the Soviet Union, and as a result, we'll overthrow the Marxist-Leninist ruling party. And it worked. It worked in Romania, and it worked in Czechoslovakia, and it worked in Poland. And they assumed it would work in China. And then in the mid-'80s, Vietnam started doing the same thing. It started having market reforms, and they thought it'll work in Vietnam. We'll just get some foreign investment in there, and communism will be overthrown, and they'll adopt the Western system, and it'll just be like the fall of the Soviet Union. We can loot the place. There you go. 1989 rolled around. And in 1989, Czechoslovakia, Poland, Romania, the various communist governments of Eastern Europe fell. And in China, they had a really big attempt to overthrow the Chinese Communist Party, the Tiananmen events of June of 1989. A bunch of protesters gathered in Tiananmen Square, and that's a whole nother thing. They've lied to us so much about that whole story. I've talked about that whole thing. I mean, that whole story there's so much malarkey we've been told about those events, but that's a whole nother stream. I can talk about that. But 1989, they tried to overthrow the Chinese Communist Party. At the same time, they were overthrowing the communists in Romania and Czechoslovakia and all those places. But it didn't work. The Chinese Communist Party stayed in power. And actually, throughout the 1990s, China continued to get wealthier. And to this day, the Chinese Communist Party is much stronger than it was in 1989. In 1989, there were a lot of people in China that were pretty upset. But China continued on its course of socialist-oriented market economy, right? They call it socialism with Chinese characteristics. And now today, the Chinese Communist Party is very strong. China's the second largest economy in the world. Vietnam, again, they thought that 1989 or so, after they had their market reforms, the people in Vietnam would want freedom so bad, they would go out and they would overthrow the Communist Party of Vietnam. And that did not happen. And in fact, today, Vietnam has had an economic miracle. Vietnam's economy is very strong, and the Communist Party of Vietnam is actually stronger than it was in 1975. And while it worked very well in Asia, they brought down the Eastern Bloc. They eventually brought down the Soviet Union with perestroika, with market reforms. It doesn't work so well in Asia. And this is very interesting. It doesn't work so well in Asia. It's the opposite. The market reforms can tend to strengthen the communist government. They don't bring it down, they strengthen it. Now, there are various reasons that this is the case. Now, many people have pointed out that in Asia during the 1980s and 90s, there were a number, and still to this day, I mean, it's a little bit different, but in Asia in the 80s in particular, 70s, 80s, and 90s, you had the Asian tiger countries, South Korea, Taiwan, Singapore, right? And these are governments, states, regimes that were authoritarian military governments that used the military to build up a planned economy. Hong Kong, when it was a British protectorate, before it became rejoined with the Chinese mainland, Hong Kong was a similar story. Very authoritarian government, but it uses the military to build up a strong economy. In South Korea, Park Chung-hee, the military dictator, he built POSCO, the state-run steel industry. He built Samsung, the electronics manufacturer. And with the military and with government oversight, these Bonapartist regimes were able to build up very, very strong economies. And we're told in America, and this drives me up the wall, oh, the free market. See, these countries weren't communist. Look, South Korea, they used the free market. They did not use the free market, right? The South Korean military, Park Chung-hee, they built the corporation. They used tax money to do it. The military gave them a monopoly. No, POSCO, Samsung, Hyundai, the car company, these are not free market entities. These are government-controlled corporations that are controlled by the state as part of an economic plan made by a military dictatorship, right? South Korea was a military dictatorship up until the mid-'80s. that's why South Korea was very, very prosperous. And the government on Taiwan, right? After the death of Chiang Kai-shek's son was in power, and again, very authoritarian, used the military, and he raised living standards pretty rapidly on the island of Taiwan. But it wasn't the free market and the wonders of the free market that did it. It was heavy state intervention. Singapore, still to this day, the government of Lee Kuan Yew is a very, very authoritarian government. And on top of that, it's very, very much a state-run economy. And I would argue these countries are capitalist in the sense their economy still functions according to profit, right? In Singapore, basically the country is run by 4 ruling families that share power, and the government facilitates them having kind of a state monopoly. And it's very much a government-controlled economy, but the government makes sure the profits flow into the hands of 4 ruling families, right? But you have these authoritarian, Bonapartist kind of military regimes, the Asian Tigers. But the reason that the Asian Tiger governments are so effective is that these countries, prior to having these governments come to power, they were feudal. It was feudalism, and out of feudalism, they industrialized. And because they industrialized, but they had been feudal before, and then they kind of went directly to a market economy after feudalism, and then that market economy gave rise to a very strong Bonapartist regime. That was because the culture of Singapore and Taiwan and South Korea was very much still a feudal culture, right? A feudal culture. The idea of having a king or a leader who controls the economy and stabilizes the economy in order to make sure that wealth, that fits, right? So, you didn't have capitalism arising kind of naturally out of feudalism. You had one day their feudalism, and then kind of artificially they become a market economy. And then a population of people that are socialized in feudalism, still have very feudal traditions, suddenly is living under a capitalist economy, but they have a government that arises that starts functioning almost in the manner of feudalism. And that's why you have these strong Bonapartist regimes. And you can argue that the reason that the Vietnamese Communist Party was not toppled, the reason the Chinese Communist Party was not toppled, was that prior to the rise of the Communist Party, prior to the rise of the Communist Party in Vietnam and in China, these countries were feudal, and they were not capitalist, right? They were largely feudal. And as a result, the population had a particular loyalty and a feeling of obligation to the state, right? That is different, right? The Confucianism, they talk about the great relationships and how, the people, the subject-object relationship. The people have an obligation to their government. The government has an obligation to the people. The teacher has an obligation to the student. The student has an obligation to the teacher. The parent has an obligation to the child. The child has an obligation to the parent. Filial piety. All of that. The culture was not one that, we're starting to have foreign investment and let's go out and riot and overthrow our country. It's not like that, right? There's an emphasis on stability. There's an emphasis on subject-object relationship, and that culturally, the color revolution thing was a lot harder to pull off in Asian culture than in Eastern Europe. And that they were able to do the color revolution thing in Eastern Europe. They weren't able to do it in Asia. So what does all this have to do with the Korean Peninsula? Well, as you can see, one of the big achievements of Donald Trump in his first term was he became the first president of the United States while in office to visit North Korea. Bill Clinton has been to North Korea, but after he left office, right? But Donald Trump is the first president of the United States who went to North Korea while he was president. And that was a big deal. And that Donald Trump said, look, I want to improve U.S. relationships with North Korea. I want to improve relations. And Donald Trump went there. And it seemed like there were a lot of people in his administration who were big supporters of it. Tulsi Gabbard, for example, was a big supporter of him doing that. She was a Democrat at that time. She's now his intelligence director. However, when Donald Trump went to North Korea, he was accompanied by Mike Pompeo and John Bolton. Now, John Bolton is currently facing criminal charges for selling secrets to U.S. allies, right? He's indicted. He turned against Trump very quickly. Mike Pompeo has also turned against Trump, but not as strongly. He didn't turn against Trump until after Trump had left office. And he's still kind of a Republican. Sometimes he'll say good things about Trump. He's not where John Bolton is, but both of them were not really Trump's friends, and both of them stabbed Trump in the back one way or another. John Bolton a lot harder than Mike Pompeo, but they're still both people that stabbed Trump in the back. And it's very clear that they were undermining Donald Trump's efforts to make peace with North Korea. They were undermining that process. Why? Why were they undermining it? And well, I guess first, how did they undermine it? First of all, John Bolton, when Donald Trump went to North Korea, John Bolton said Libyan options are on the table. We all know what happened in Libya, right? We all know that Gaddafi ended up getting killed. U.S. reconciliation with Libya under Obama did not end well. And so if you announce when you're trying to reconcile with a country and improve relations, oh, we might be doing what we were doing in Libya, that didn't end too well. That was the first thing. Then, shortly after the meetings between Trump and Kim Jong-un started, the Spanish North Korean embassy, the embassy of North Korea in Spain, was raided. All kinds of people went into the embassy, stole computers, vandalized the place, and it was all over Spanish media. Got like no attention here. But that the individuals who raided the North Korean embassy in Spain were all Americans. They were CIA-linked individuals, and it was basically the CIA invaded. That's an act of war. If you invade a country's embassy, that's an act of war against that country. And so, at the same time, the USA is trying to negotiate with North Korea. A bunch of CIA people engaged in a raid, an act of war against the North Korean embassy in Spain. And it was clear that the deep state was trying to undermine the reconciliation between the USA and North Korea. Why? Why was that? Well, the reason was that that apparently what was going on at the time was that there was a fear on the part of some within the intelligence community that if the USA were to enable North Korea to have a reform and opening up, which is what Kim Jong-un wants to do. He wants to bring in foreign investment, that it would not lead to the overthrow of the Korean Workers' Party, that the Korean Workers' Party would get stronger as a result. And I think that's true. I think that, yeah, the people of North Korea are not going to overthrow the Korean Workers' Party just because a bunch of foreign investment comes in. If anything, they're going to say, good one, Kim Jong-un, you got us a bunch of foreign investment. And, North Korea is an economic powerhouse just waiting to happen, right? Most North Koreans, the overwhelming majority of people in North Korea can speak more than one language. Those mountains are full of of minerals. They're also, North Korea already makes its own cell phones in-house. They have a huge manufacturing capacity. They've got beaches, they've got mountains. North Korea is just waiting to open up. And it's going to be a bonanza. It's going to be a field day when North Korea opens up. And on top of that, North Korea opening up will not only lead to a lot of money being made and the living standard of people in North Korea going up and a lot of other people making money, it's also going to lead to North Korea having much more of an audience, right? Right now, the U.S. deep state is furious about RT. Oh, my goodness. RT, that can't exist. We can't have RT. They're furious about CGTN, CCTV from China. Oh, my gosh, we can't have this. They're furious about Press TV. Oh, my God, we can't have Press TV from Iran. Imagine if there was a North Korean version of RT, a North Korean version of CCTV, a North Korean version of Press TV. Now, that is something that the U.S. government, the deep state in particular, the CIA that handles propaganda and Project Mockingbird and all that, they really don't want. The idea of a North Korean RT, a North Korean Press TV, scares the bejesus out of them, right? Because North Korea has not forgotten that the United States killed 4 million of their people in the Korean War. North Korea has not forgotten that during the 1990s, there was a crisis of malnutrition imposed on them by the United States, by the sanctions. North Korea has the Juche ideology, which is, it's their interpretation of Marxism-Leninism applied to the Korean Peninsula, self-reliance and all of that. And North Korea, if they were to spread their ideology around the world, they would do so in a way that would really boost opposition to U.S. foreign policy, opposition to market liberalization. And North Korea, look, North Korea built a beautiful statue, the monument to African Renaissance in Senegal. I will put it on the screen. It's one of my most favorite images. Is this image of this? The government of Senegal hired North Korea to build their monument to commemorate their independence. And North Korea did an amazing job. It's an amazing monument. I will put it on the screen. The Monument of African Renaissance. It is one of the most beautiful pieces of art I've ever seen, right? North Korea built this in Africa, in Senegal. Look at that, right? You've got a father, you got a little baby, you've got a mother, the wife, the mother. It's beautiful. It is celebrating natalism and having children. It is celebrating physical fitness. It is celebrating strong families. And it is amazing. It's celebrating humanity. This is just a really, really amazing work of art, right? It's really amazing. It's amazing. North Korea, they're Asians, but they built like an epic Black Power monument in Senegal, right? This is about the African people building themselves up. Kinkle is right. It is celebrating the future. It is just a beautiful, beautiful piece of art. And it's a slap in the face to the synthetic left. Why? The synthetic left doesn't want people in Africa to have children. Right. They are furious about overpopulation. Right. That's what, Jane Goodall and, the British Empire and the World Economic Forum. Oh, my gosh, we can't have, African people breeding. We can't have it. No. That's what they're furious about. Right. And it's a slap in the face to the environmental Malthusian synthetic left. It's a slap in the face to the imperialists and the colonizers. It is a Black Power monument. North Korea built that. North Korea, they have given weapons and support to the Palestinians. They even threatened to use their nukes to defend Greta Thunberg. I don't know if you saw that. When Greta Thunberg was giving aid to the Palestinians, she was arrested by the Israelis. The North Koreans said that if anything happens to Greta, we will nuke you. We will use our nuclear arsenal to protect, Greta Thunberg and her mission to Gaza. Right? North Korea supported Nelson Mandela. North Korea supported the Black Panthers of the United States. They were given financial backing from North Korea. Eldridge Cleaver even lived in North Korea for a couple of years. One of Eldridge Cleaver's daughters was born in North Korea. Years ago, I was in a communist group, the Workers' World Party, and in their office, they had the complete works of Kim Il-sung, big set of volumes. And I said, how did you get them? And they said, well, when the Black Panther Party of Detroit, when their office closed down, we found the complete works of Kim Il-sung outside on the street. And instead of having them be taken to the garbage, we took them to our office. That's how much North Korea and the Black Panthers were ideologically tied to each other. In fact, of all the communist governments in the world, the North Koreans were probably the closest to the Black Panthers. Little interesting story there, right? And that Eldridge Cleaver actually published his own edition of Kim Il-sung's writings on the Juche ideology. North Korea and the Black Panthers were very close. North Korea is currently supporting Burkina Faso. Robert Mugabe's private security guards were North Koreans, right? He had, instead of having Zimbabwean Secret Service protect him, he had North Korean bodyguards. Robert Mugabe, the leader of Zimbabwe. North Korea is very, very much an anti-imperialist, anti-colonial country. That is just who they are, right? They are born in anti-colonial, anti-imperialist revolution. That's just what they are. And there is a fear on the part of Mike Pompeo and John Bolton and a lot of people in the CIA that if North Korea has a reform and opening up, the result is the Korean Workers' Party will get stronger. The result is the ideology, the anti-imperialist, anti-colonial ideology of North Korea will spread throughout the world. And that really, really scares and upsets them. That's what they're afraid of. That's what they are afraid of. It's that simple. And so they're trying to stop it at all